Christmas Eve 1985 should have been an ordinary day for Erich Schaedler. He was only 36, still playing professional football, still extraordinarily fit, and still remembered as one of the toughest defenders Scottish football had produced. But before that Christmas was over, something happened in the Scottish borders that would leave questions behind for decades. Schaedler had spent part of the day with his brother John in Peebles. They ate together. Eric helped him assemble furniture. According to John's later recollection, there was nothing about his brother's behavior that warned him of what was coming. Eric even suggested going for a drink. John declined because he still had Christmas presents to prepare for his children. The brothers parted. It was the last time John would see him alive. Later, Schaedler headed into the borders. He enjoyed rough shooting and knew the countryside, so there was nothing particularly unusual about him going out alone. But he never returned. When he failed to collect his dogs from neighbors, concern began to grow. 3 days later, on December 27, the search ended. Erich Schaedler was found dead inside his car in Woodland near Cardrona. He was just 36 years old. Police concluded that he had taken his own life and reported no suspicious circumstances. There was no known suicide note. For the authorities, the investigation had produced an explanation. For members of Eric's family, it had produced questions. They struggled to reconcile the official conclusion with the man they believed they had seen only hours earlier. Years later, those doubts would lead to further examination of Schaedler's final days. Journalist Colin Leslie eventually spent years researching his life and speaking to the people who had known him. Yet even that investigation could not produce a definitive alternative explanation for what happened. The official conclusion remained. So did the family's doubts. And some of the circumstances they later described would ensure that the story of Erich Schaedler's death never became quite as simple as it first appeared. If the stories of football's unforgettable characters deserve to live on, subscribe and help us keep their memories alive. But to understand why his death shocked Scottish football so deeply, we first have to understand who Shades really was. Because before tragedy became attached to his name, Erich Schaedler had built a reputation as one of the hardest, fittest, and most unforgettable characters of his generation. Erich Schaedler's route into professional football began with an unusual family story. His father, Eric Sr., had arrived in Scotland as a German prisoner of war during the Second World War. He remained after the war and built a life there. His son grew up Scottish, and football eventually gave the younger Erich an identity entirely his own. His first major opportunity came with Stirling Albion. Schaedler was powerful, quick, and fiercely competitive. He wasn't regarded as the most polished footballer. What separated him was his willingness to work. Hibernian noticed. In 1969, they brought him to Easter Road for around £7,000. It became the defining move of his career. Schaedler earned his place through relentless preparation. Fitness became one of his great strengths. He also developed a serious interest in conditioning and physiotherapy. Pat Stanton later remembered him as a tremendous tackler and an exceptional worker. Gradually, the raw defender became one of Hibs' most dependable players. And around Easter Road, everyone came to know him as Shades. Then Eddie Turnbull returned as manager in 1971. He assembled the thrilling side, remembered as Turnbull's Tornadoes. Pat Stanton, John Blackley, Alex Cropley, Alex Edwards, Arthur Duncan, Alan Gordon, Jimmy O'Rourke, and Schaedler. He provided energy, aggression, and enormous stamina. In 1972, Hibs reached the Scottish Cup final. Later that year came silverware. At Hampden, Hibernian defeated Celtic 2-1 to win the Scottish League Cup. Then came a result that entered Edinburgh football folklore, New Year's Day, 1973. Hearts against Hibernian at Tynecastle. Hibs won 7-0. Schaedler had become part of a team supporters would remember for generations. His performances eventually brought international recognition. In March 1974, Scotland selected him against West Germany, the country of his father's birth. Scotland lost 2-1 in Frankfurt. It would be Schaedler's only full international appearance. But Willie Ormond still selected him for Scotland's 1974 World Cup squad. With Danny McGrain and Sandy Jardine providing formidable competition at fullback, Schaedler never appeared in the tournament. Even so, he had travelled an extraordinary distance. From Stirling Albion to one of Hibernian's greatest sides, from Easter Road to a Scotland shirt. and ultimately, to a World Cup. But the Tornadoes could not remain together forever. By 1977, Schaedler's relationship with Eddie Turnbull had deteriorated, and his first spell at Hibs ended with a move to Dundee. Leaving Easter Road hurt him, yet Dundee would reveal another side of Shades and show what happened when the footballer who had built his reputation on refusing to give in suddenly had to start again. The club changed. His attitude did not. At Dens Park, he brought the same fitness, aggression, and professionalism that had defined him at Easter Road. In 1978-79, Dundee won the First Division Championship and returned to the top flight. Later that year, they reached the Scottish League Cup final. Schaedler had proved that his best years were not entirely behind him. But teammates also encountered a side of him supporters rarely saw. Away from matches, he could be thoughtful and quiet. Former Dundee teammate Ian Redford later remembered a man who could sometimes become withdrawn, although nobody could truly know what Schaedler was carrying privately. In 1981, Eric returned to Hibernian. The Tornadoes era had passed. Now he was the experienced professional, with years of knowledge behind him. His career eventually took him to Dumbarton, where younger players including Owen Coyle and Alan Moore remembered Schaedler helping them understand what professional football demanded. He was already thinking beyond playing, fitness, coaching, physiotherapy, and business. One of his Edinburgh pubs even carried the nickname everyone associated with him, Shades. Then, in 1984, something extraordinary happened there. An armed man, carrying a loaded shotgun, attempted a robbery. Schaedler helped two police officers overpower and disarm him. For his actions, he received a Lothian Police Meritorious Award. It seemed completely consistent with his reputation. Shades had spent his football career refusing to back down. Now he had shown remarkable courage away from football too. But by 1985, his life was beginning to change. His playing career was nearing its end. His marriage had broken down. His business interests had encountered difficulties. None of those circumstances alone explains what followed. And people who encountered Schaedler during his final days apparently saw no obvious warning of what was coming. That makes the contrast difficult to escape. Barely a year after being honoured for confronting an armed robber, one of Scottish football's toughest characters was approaching the final Christmas of his life. And soon, those closest to him would begin asking questions that would survive for decades. In the days after Erich Schaedler's death, the official explanation was clear. Police found no suspicious circumstances. But inside the Schaedler family, acceptance was much harder. His brother John could not reconcile the conclusion with what he knew of Erich, and gradually, other details began troubling the family. One concerned a series of strange telephone calls. John later claimed that his mother received anonymous calls suggesting something had happened to Erich before the family fully understood that he was missing. Nobody was ever publicly identified as the caller, and there was no established evidence explaining what those calls meant. Then there was the condition in which Erich's car had reportedly been found. According to his family's later account, branches and foliage appeared to have been placed over it. Again, that did not prove another person had been involved. But to the Schaedlers, it was another detail demanding an explanation. John also became troubled by what he found at his brother's home. Erich was not known for keeping an immaculate flat. Yet John later recalled finding it unusually clean after his death. Then came perhaps the strangest allegation of all. As John continued asking questions, he claimed that a senior figure from the legal profession warned him to stop pursuing the matter. None of these claims established foul play. Police had reached their conclusion. No evidence publicly emerged proving that somebody else caused Erich's death. But his family now had reasons of their own for refusing to consider the matter settled. And years later, one journalist would return to those questions and begin examining Erich Schaedler's life and death in extraordinary detail. Years later, journalist Colin Leslie returned to the questions surrounding Erich Schaedler's death. For his book Shades, The Short Life and Tragic Death of Erich Schaedler, he spent years researching the case. He spoke to former teammates, friends, family members, and people who had encountered Erich during his final days. Leslie found no simple answer. Some remembered that beneath Schaedler's famously tough exterior was a quieter, deeply introspective man. But those who had been around him shortly before his death apparently gave no clear indication that they believed he was preparing to take his own life. That did not disprove the official conclusion. private distress can remain hidden, but it helped explain why those final days remained so difficult to understand. Leslie also examined the concerns raised by Schaedler's family. After years of research, however, he found no evidence proving that another person had caused Eric's death. There were unanswered questions, there were family suspicions, but there was no proven alternative explanation. The authorities had reached their conclusion. His family remained unconvinced, and even Leslie's extensive investigation could not provide the definitive answer everyone wanted. No publicly established evidence has since overturned the original conclusion. Yet the questions surrounding Schaedler's final hours have never entirely disappeared. What remains beyond dispute is his place in Scottish football. The relentless fullback of Turnbull's Tornadoes, a League Cup winner, a Scotland international, a member of the 1974 World Cup squad, and the man generations of Hibernian supporters simply knew as Shades. Erich Schaedler was only 36 when his life ended. His final hours may never be completely understood, but the footballer who gave everything on the pitch has never been forgotten. Subscribe and help keep the memory of football's lost legends alive.